day Eli Mercer said the words, "Pick anything you want," he believed he was speaking from a place of hard-earned power, the kind forged by years of blood, dust, loss, and survival on a land that never loved anyone back. He stood in the open square of the frontier settlement, boots planted in packed earth, the sun bleaching the color from everything it touched, and around him lay the spoils of a long and brutal campaign, captured, weapons stacked like kindling, frightened faces half hidden behind canvas tents, the low murmur of a town that had learned to watch and wait rather than speak. His voice carried easily, trained by years of command, and when he spoke, men listened, because Eli Mercer had buried too many of them to be ignored. He was a widower, a ranch owner, a man whose name was spoken with a mix of gratitude and fear, and beside him stood his two daughters, Clara and May, small hands clutching the worn fabric of his coat as if anchoring themselves to the only certainty they had left in the world. Their mother had died 3 winters earlier, taken by a fever that did not care how much love Eli had left to give, and since then the girls had learned silence, the way other children learned games. The offer Eli made that day was meant to be practical, almost merciful by frontier standards. Choose land, choose horses, choose protection, choose passage out of danger. But it was never meant to be complicated, never meant to challenge the shape of his world. He had not anticipated the stillness that fell when his daughter stepped forward, had not expected the way the air itself seemed to tighten as 2 small voices carried, farther than his ever could. The Apache woman knelt on the wooden platform at the center of the square, wrists bound loosely with chain more symbolic than secure, her posture straight, unbroken, her dark eyes forward, refusing to beg, refusing to look away. She had been captured after a skirmish in the hills, brought in not as a trophy but as a problem no one knew how to solve. Some wanted her gone, some wanted her punished, some wanted her traded, but none of them had seen what Clara saw when she looked at the, woman's face. Not defiance alone, but endurance, not anger, but something like grief held steady by will. When May tugged at Eli's sleeve and whispered, "Papa," he knelt to hear her, expecting fear, expecting confusion, expecting the innocent questions children ask when they are surrounded by things they do not yet understand. Instead, she pointed, small finger unwavering, and said with a clarity that cut through the square like a blade, "We want her." Eli's breath caught, not because he didn't hear her, but because he did, and because in that moment the past he thought he had buried rose up sharp and undeniable. He saw his wife again, kneeling by the hearth, hands scarred from work, eyes steady in the face of hardship, a woman who had once been a stranger and had become the center of his world. He felt the weight of every decision he had made since her death. Every night he had chosen strength over softness. Every time he had believed survival was enough. The Apache woman finally lifted her gaze then, just slightly, enough to meet the eyes of the 2 girls who were staring at her not with fear, but with a strange instinctive recognition. Her name, though no one in the square bothered to ask it, was Nantan, and she had lost more than Eli Mercer could imagine. Her people had been scattered, her family taken by violence and disease, her life narrowed to the next breath, the next step, the next stand. She had learned early that mercy was rare and often disguised, and so she did not speak when the girls made their request, did not plead or protest when murmurs rippled through the crowd. She waited because waiting had kept her alive. Eli stood slowly, every eye on him now, his authority suddenly fragile in a way it had never been before. He could feel the town watching, measuring him, ready to follow or judge depending on what he did next. He thought of the promise implicit in his words, the danger of breaking them, the greater danger of keeping them. He looked at his daughters, really looked at them, saw the hunger in their eyes not for safety or comfort, but for connection, for something true in a world that had taught them too early how easily things could be taken away. The square seemed to hold its breath as Eli spoke again, his voice quieter now, stripped of command and edged with something like wonder. "You know what you're asking," he said, though it was more a question to himself than to them. Clara nodded, her braids swinging, her chin lifted with a resolve that mirrored the woman on the platform. "She's not afraid," Clara said simply, and the truth of it struck Eli harder than any accusation. Nantan watched the exchange with careful eyes, understanding more from tone and posture than words, and when Eli finally turned to her, she met his gaze without flinching. There was no gratitude there yet, no trust, only a quiet acknowledgement of shared survival. In that moment, something shifted, not just for Eli, but for everyone watching, because they saw a man confronted not by an enemy, but by a choice that could not be undone. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square, Eli Mercer realized that whatever he decided next would change the story his daughters told themselves about the world forever. If this story has pulled you into its world, if you feel the weight of this moment and want to know what choice a broken man makes when confronted with unexpected grace, stay with us, because this is only the beginning. And stories like this, stories about courage, loss, and unlikely bonds deserve to be told and remembered. So consider subscribing now, so you don't miss what comes next. The town did not sleep that night, not truly, because news like that seeps into walls and dreams alike, and every candle that burned behind a shuttered window carried a different version of the same question. Had Eli Mercer lost his mind? Or had he finally found something the rest of them had misplaced long ago? He took Nantan from the square not as a prisoner dragged by force, but as a responsibility accepted in silence, cutting the chains himself. With hands that shook just enough to betray the weight of what he was doing, she followed at a measured distance, not out of obedience but caution, her senses tuned to every sound, every shift in the air, every possible betrayal that could still come. Clara and May walked between them, small hands clasped together, glancing back at the woman with a mix of awe and nervous hope, as if afraid she might vanish the moment they stopped looking. The walk to the Mercer ranch felt longer than it ever had, the dirt road stretching beneath a moon that seemed too bright, illuminating every doubt Eli tried to bury beneath his steady stride. He knew what people would say by morning, knew some would refuse to trade with him, others would watch for weakness, and a few might test the limits of his promise in ways that could only end in blood. Yet beneath the fear was something else, something unfamiliar and unsettling, a sense that for the first time since his wife's death, he was not merely surviving but choosing. When they reached the ranch house, Nantan paused at the threshold, reading the structure the way she read landscapes, noting exits, shadows, the smell of old wood and iron. Eli stepped aside, an unspoken invitation rather than an order, and she crossed into the lamplight with the same quiet dignity she had carried through the square. The girls hovered close, chattering softly now that the danger felt momentarily distant, asking questions that Eli pretended not to hear because he did not yet know how to answer them. That first night passed in fragments. Eli sitting awake at the table long after the lamps were turned low, Nantan resting near the door, not sleeping so much as listening. The girls curled together in their shared bed, whispering plans and possibilities as if dreaming them aloud might make them real. By morning, the ranch felt different. Not safer, but fuller, as if the walls themselves were adjusting to a new shape of family they had never known. The days that followed were not easy, and they were not gentle, but they were honest in a way Eli had almost forgotten was possible. Nantan spoke little at first, learning the rhythms of the place, the temper of the horses, the habits of the land, her presence both watchful and restrained. Eli did not pretend to know how to bridge the distance between them, so he did not rush it, allowing work to speak where words failed. He showed her the boundaries of the ranch, the creek that ran low in summer and wild in spring, the places where the land could be generous and where it demanded respect. She showed him in return a different way of seeing, how to read the sky for weather before clouds gathered, how to move quietly without fear, how to notice what others overlooked. The girls watched everything, absorbing lessons without realizing it, learning strength not as something loud and violent, but as something steady and deliberate. Clara asked questions, with the fearless curiosity of a child who had already known loss, while May followed Nantan like a shadow, mimicking her movements, her stillness, her way of listening before acting. The town did not make things easier. Whispers followed Eli into the market. Glances lingered too long, and more than one man questioned his judgment with a hand too close to a gun. Eli met each challenge with a calm he did not entirely feel, bolstered by the quiet certainty that whatever danger lay ahead, it was better faced honestly than avoided through cruelty. Nantan sensed the tension, understood enough of the language to grasp the risk she represented to his standing, and one evening she spoke at last, her voice low and measured, telling him he owed her nothing, that she would leave if her presence endangered his children. Eli listened without interruption, then answered with a truth he had not planned to reveal, that the danger had always been there, that the world they lived in did not offer safety as a permanent condition, and that for the first time in a long while, his daughters slept without nightmares. Something softened in her then, not into trust but into recognition, and that was enough to begin. As weeks passed, the ranch became a place of quiet transformation, not without setbacks or fear, but marked by moments of shared laughter, of understanding forged through small daily acts. Nantan taught the girls stories of the land, not as fairy tales but as lessons, and Eli found himself listening too, realizing how little he had truly known about the world he claimed to own. The town's resistance did not vanish, but it shifted. Curiosity replacing hostility as people saw that the ranch did not fall into chaos, that the children thrived, that Eli's strength had not diminished but deepened. And still, beneath the progress, a shadow loomed because choices like Eli's are rarely allowed to stand unchallenged for long, and forces were gathering beyond the horizon that would demand more than quiet resolve. If you're feeling the pull of this story, if you want to see how courage grows not in isolation but in connection, stay with us because the hardest trials are yet to come, and subscribing now means you won't miss the moment when everything they've built is put to the test. The first sign that the fragile peace Eli had built was about to be tested came not with gunfire or shouted threats, but with silence, the kind that settles unnaturally, over land when even the birds sense that something is wrong. It was early morning when Nantan noticed it, standing at the edge of the corral with May beside her, both of them watching the horizon where the hills folded into one, another like sleeping animals. She felt it before she saw it, a tightening in her chest born of long memory, of years spent learning to recognize danger not by what appeared, but by what vanished. Eli was repairing a fence when she called his name, her voice steady but urgent, and he looked up to see her pointing not at a figure or a plume of dust, but at the absence of movement where cattle should have been grazing. He followed her gaze and felt the same chill creep through him, the old instinct that had kept him alive through winters and wars stirring awake. Clara appeared then, carrying a bucket, and froze when she sensed the tension, her eyes moving from her father to Nantan, reading their faces with a growing understanding that the world was shifting again. By midday, confirmation arrived in the form of a neighbor riding hard, his horse lathered, his face pale, bringing word of a group moving through the area. Armed men, not from the town, not interested in trade, drawn by rumors of weakness and opportunity. They spoke of reclaiming order, of restoring balance. But Eli knew that kind of language, had used it himself once, and recognized it now for what it was, an excuse for violence dressed up as righteousness. The ranch became a place of preparation rather than rest. Tools checked, supplies gathered, quiet plans made without panic. Nantan moved with purpose, her calm lending strength to the others, teaching Eli and the girls how to hide tracks, how to move silently, how to think beyond the straight lines of fear. There was no talk of running, not because it wasn't possible, but because it would not protect what mattered most, the sense of home that had taken root between them. When the men arrived, they came with confidence sharpened into cruelty, their leader speaking loudly of law and ownership, his eyes cold as he took in the sight of Nantan standing openly beside Eli, unbowed. He demanded she be handed over, cloaking his threat in the language of safety, claiming the children would be better off without her influence. Eli felt anger rise, hot and dangerous, but before he could speak, Clara stepped forward, her voice small but unshaking, telling the men that this was their home, that no one had the right to take it apart piece by piece. The moment hung heavy, the kind that splits a life into before and after, and Nantan placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder, a silent promise of protection that went deeper than words. What followed was not the battle the men expected, not a show of brute force, but a confrontation shaped by resolve and community. Neighbors arriving, drawn not by fear but by a growing sense that something worth defending stood at that ranch. Eli spoke then not as a commander, but as a father, a man who had learned too late the cost of choosing power over compassion, and his words carried because they were true. The men retreated, not defeated but exposed, their authority hollow in the face of a family that refused to be divided. In the aftermath, as dusk settled and the land exhaled, Eli realized that whatever dangers lay ahead, they would not face them alone anymore. Nent and Leia looked out over the ranch, seeing not a place of captivity or refuge, but a shared future shaped by choice rather than fate. The girls leaned against her, unafraid, and in that quiet moment, the meaning of family expanded beyond blood and tradition into something braver and more enduring. If this chapter has kept you holding your breath, if you feel the stakes rising and want to see how love reshapes courage when it's tested, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final chapter, where everything they've fought for will either be claimed or lost forever. The final trial did not arrive like a storm crashing all at once, but like a slow, relentless tightening of the world around them, a pressure that tested not just their defenses, but the truth of everything they had become together. Word spread beyond the valley of what had happened at the Mercer Ranch, carried and twisted by fear, pride, and resentment, until it reached men who believed order could only exist if someone like Nantan Leia knew her place or disappeared entirely. They came with numbers this time, and with a confidence that came from thinking the past could be repeated without consequence. Eli felt the weight of that history pressing down on him as he stood on his porch at dawn, watching his daughters sleep for what might be the last time without knowing the cost of the day ahead. He did not wake them at first, because he wanted to hold on to that innocence just a moment longer, but Nantan Leia was already awake, already prepared, her presence beside him as steady as the land itself. There were no speeches between them, no promises made aloud, only a shared understanding that whatever happened next would be faced together. When the riders appeared, dust rising like a warning written across the sky, the ranch did not respond with chaos, but with quiet coordination born of trust. Neighbors arrived again, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to stand, forming a line that spoke louder than any threat. The confrontation that followed was not remembered for its violence, but for its refusal to surrender a woman to fear, refusal to teach children that love was something to be negotiated, refusal to let the old world dictate the shape of the new. Words were exchanged, then ultimatums, then silence, and in that silence something irreversible occurred as people on both sides recognized the cost of crossing it. The men left, not convinced but changed, their certainty fractured by a truth they could not easily erase. In the days that followed, life did not return to what it had been, because it could not. Instead, it grew into something stronger, rooted in the knowledge that home was not a place granted by power, but one built by courage and care. Nantan Leia did not become the girls' mother in the way the world might have expected, through papers or proclamations, but through mornings spent teaching, through nights spent listening, through the quiet, unremarkable acts that shape a life. Eli found himself healing in ways he had never allowed, learning that love did not weaken him, but gave his strength direction. The town slowly changed too, not all at once, not without resistance but undeniably, as children grew up seeing something different modeled before them. Years later, when Clara and May told the story of the day their father said, "Pick anything you want," they did not speak of fear or defiance, but of choice, of a moment when kindness rewrote a future that violence had tried to claim. And if this story has stayed with you, if it has reminded you that the most powerful revolutions begin in the quiet decision to love where hatred expects surrender, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, stories that challenge, inspire, and prove that even in the harshest worlds, humanity still has a place to stand.